second reading today comes from Matthew chapter 10, verses 40 through 42. Hear the word of the Lord. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of righteousness. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. This is the word of the Lord. I struggled with today's sermon. I save all of the things that I preach, and so when I opened up the file, I saw that I've preached this same passage a few years ago. I think this must be the time that Mike goes on vacation often, because I have 3 different times that I've preached during this season when he's been gone. Summers are good for me to do that, and so I usually try to say yes when he asks. But I did particularly struggle with this passage because I've preached it before. It was during the pandemic. We were shut down, and I think I was probably preaching to a camera rather than in person. It was also during the Black Lives Matter protests. It was a really tumultuous time for us in our nation. My sermon that day focused on the word, whoever welcomes. The idea that we can walk with people through their struggles and walk into their struggles with them. Today, right now, we're still facing a myriad of crises, things that seek to divide us, things that challenge our faith. Personally, being a recovering Baptist, one of the things that I have been particularly wounded by is one of my largest evangelical denominations in this nation voted recently to expel any church that had a woman as their pastor. Our highest court just recently decided that in some cases it's okay to discriminate. It's kind of tough to be a Christian right now and hold on to your faith when there seems to be a lot of things that would seek to divide us and tear us apart. I thought about choosing a different passage. I don't have to stick with the lectionary, but I just kept coming back to these verses and the graciousness of them that I want to embody every day. It's a simple exhortation that Jesus gives. Whoever welcomes. Simple is not a word that most people think of when they think of their faith. In most places of worship, there are rules for everything. Little boxes that we've created to fit our faith practice in order to make sure we are doing it right. I've worked at a lot of churches over the years, and some of the churches I work at argued constantly about what we should sing, how we should sing it. Should we use hymnals? Should we project the lyrics? Should we sing only hymns? Should we sing only choruses? What do we preach? Who gets to preach? What do we wear? What we don't wear? When we meet, I sat in a 2-hour meeting where elders in the church argued over whether or not it was appropriate to cancel a Wednesday night service. Who gets to take communion? There's some churches who argue about that. Who gets to serve communion? And don't even get me started on baptism. There's a lot of fights about that. Is it a sign? Is it a symbol? Is it a covenant? Some of these issues have been argued over for centuries by much smarter people than me. But it definitely makes the church anything but simple. In one of my intro classes at seminary, one of my professors thought he would have some fun with us. We were all new. It's an intro class, so probably our first class ever in the program, or maybe our second. And I'm sure if anyone was like me, they thought they had everything figured out. And so he asked, we couldn't use any flowery language, but he asked if there were any volunteers in class who could, in plain language, explain the Trinity. Several people raised their hands. I did not. I was terrified. Several people raised their hands and spectacularly failed at explaining what seems to be a pretty basic tenet of our faith. My favorite example of this, a guy stood up, he blustered about for almost 10 minutes, tying himself into so many theological knots that he finally said, well, crap, I've confused myself. As I stand before you today, there are churches meeting in our town who would never allow me to step into this pulpit. They've somehow decided, based on a few sentences in the Bible, that half the world's population isn't qualified, capable, or allowed. I was once told that I could teach a Sunday school class full of boys, but only till they turned 18. Because once they turn 18, they're an adult man, and women can't have authority over a man. I always thought that was interesting. Never mind that there are countless other things in the Bible that we don't apply literally. That hundreds of scholars agree that historical context is foundationally important when reading, interpreting, and applying any of these writings. Never mind that a myriad of people from all genders and walks of life throughout the pages of the Bible are used to proclaim the gospel and share its teachings. There are still some who, like my old classmate at seminary, would tie themselves in knots to place carefully constructed walls around who gets to practice, what we should practice, and how we should practice our faith. Our passage today strips all of that away. All the rules, all the behaviors, all the expectations, the rituals, and the tiny little boxes that some want to place around their faith. In speaking to his followers about how to go out and share this message of hope, Jesus gives simple instructions. Whoever welcomes you. But what about whoever welcomes you? But they said, whoever welcomes you. But what they're doing over here, whoever welcomes you. And he takes it a step further. Not just whoever welcomes, but whoever gives even a cup of cold water. A few chapters later, the smart people, the religious leaders, the pastors, the elders, they're trying to trip Jesus up because they're mad. Everything he is teaching goes against everything that they are doing. Their clothes, their rituals, what they eat, their gatekeeping on who gets to participate. And so they ask him a series of questions, trying to trick him into either offending the Roman rulers, which could land him in jail or worse, or his followers, so that he can lose his popularity and his momentum. So after they fail asking him about tithing, he has an answer. Marriage, he has an answer. Resurrection, he has an answer. One of them asks him, what is the greatest commandment? What is the thing that you say is the most important thing that we should be doing? Because, if we can trick him into saying something, then we can maybe twist it later and use it against him. Jesus responds by saying that everything, all of it, from our story about Abraham to today, can be simplified and boiled down into two things. And you know what I'm about to say. Love God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And love your neighbor. That's it. There were so many different things he could have said at that moment. When asked about the most important teachings to practice, if there was ever a moment to construct walls and little boxes to put our faith in, this was that slam dunk moment. If there was ever a moment to clearly define who's in and who's out, this was it. He could have easily talked about church attendance, music styles, clothing, what makes someone worthy or unworthy. But at that moment, he didn't focus on any of those things because he knew the most important thing is love. True faith is love. Caring for others, embracing the outcast, the weak, the poor, the marginalized, the ones who don't have a voice, welcoming all, regardless of what they look like, who they vote for, or who they love. True faith is loving God and loving others. It's much easier to create rules. It's much easier to create rules, to have a system so that we can easily identify who's in and who's out, to put our faith and people into small little boxes that we can control. It's much easier to argue about and get lost in all of the other things. It takes a lot more faith to be open, to wrestle, to be okay with not knowing or understanding everything, and to simply lead with love. To let go of our need to be right, to be first, to be best, and to simply follow his example of loving and welcoming others. My faith as a 20-year-old looks a whole lot different than my faith as a 46-year-old. I am thankful for a church that allows me to ask questions. I am thankful for a body of believers that allows me to wrestle with things. Whoever welcomes. It's pretty a simple concept. As I close today, I want you to listen to the words of this prayer. It's attributed to St. Patrick, whether he wrote it or it's just attributed to his ministry. The message is simple. And may its simplicity guide our actions and words as we gently push back against those who want to draw lines and boxes around our faith. Christ with me, Christ before me. Christ behind me, Christ in me. Christ beneath me, Christ above me. Christ on my right and Christ on my left. Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down. Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me. Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me. Christ in the eye that sees me, and Christ in the ear that hears me. May it be true of us, and may it be said of us. Amen.